Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome back to the second edition of the podcast. We're still considering names. We'll start off the podcast with shout outs to our current name suggestions, which are in the mix. First of all is to Daniel Olsen, pal right in the kisser. Second of all to James Jenner, Cameron's couch.
I like Cameron's couch.
Now, there is no couch here, but it could be a metaphor. And the third one is to a user who we don't know personally on our YouTube channel, but we want to let you know that we appreciate you. So we're going to give you a quick shout out. Alex, you want to read out who that is?
1911 greater than all. What about two bloomed onions in reference for being Australian and drinking? Thank you to 1911 greater than all. Strange name, but good suggestion.
All right, beautiful. And also, as you can probably tell, we got a new camera angle.
It's exciting.
New books underneath the microphones. It's all going on over here.
It's all happening.
So that's going well. What do you want to talk about today?
Well, I've got a couple of items on the agenda on the potential kind of topics. Well, I'll give you a quick run through. Basically, what we've got, look, we don't really want to talk about it, but I feel like it's our obligation as public broadcasters. LibSpill, so that's going on as we speak. We're also going to be talking about the minimum wage. And, of course, the man everyone loves to hate, Donald Trump. So if you're keen on hearing a bit about minimum wage Donald Trump,
LibSpill.
The LibSpill, check in, get ready, because we're about to blow your mind, maybe.
So I'll give a bit of an introduction to the LibSpill. Maybe you want to actually check the odds if you can. I don't know if you can.
Let's have a look at Sportsbet.
We've had our Prime Minister for the last year, Malcolm Turnbull, Big Mal. He started with a pretty high approval rating. I think it might have even been around 70 or 80%. Anyway, hasn't really gone up. It's gone on a pretty strong downward trajectory for a while. And it's led to a point where the base of the Liberal Party was... There's essentially two sides of the Liberal Party. There's the moderate side and there's the Conservative side. Tony Abbott, since John Howard, has been the leader of the Conservative side, and Malcolm has more or less been the leader of the moderates. So when Tony's prime ministership failed, Malcolm came in. Everyone loved the idea of Malcolm because he was everyone thought he could shine in business because before politics he was... I think was he a lawyer or was he a businessman?
No, I'm pretty sure he was an investment banker.
He's an investment banker. And
that's my understanding.
People thought he could do a really good job with the economy while being kind of progressive on some of the social issues.
He's one of those, what they thought he was going to be one of these kind of new breed, fiscally conservative but socially progressive, kind of centre-right leaders.
And... you know, maybe it could have worked. He just ran into some problems where those two goals or ideals kind of clashed. And the main one that kind of erupted was the tension between fiscal conservatism and climate change policy, where you could not really have clean energy targets, Paris Agreement, investment in green energy or a carbon tax or anything, or any of the policy suggestions that would be economically integrated to prevent global warming, as well as having kind of a freer market.
More specifically, downward pressure on power prices.
Downward pressure on power prices, yeah.
So that's kind of the two, it seems now, diametrically opposed positions, is the idea that you can commit to a quote, greener future while simultaneously reducing the cost of power. What we've seen so far, and obviously it's a massive hot button issue at the minute, is kind of the idea that you just can't do both at the same time, for a number of reasons. But just quickly before we move on, the LibSpill, we got the markets. I got live markets here. This is our Sportsbet. I don't want
12:35 p.m.
Eastern time
on the 24th of August on Friday. It might not be released for a while, but you'll get the live tension. You'll feel the atmosphere as if you're right here in the moment. Even if it's next year, you'll feel like you're right in the room as Australia doesn't know who the next Prime Minister is.
Well, they don't. Well, they don't even know who the next Liberal Party leader is going to be, let alone the Prime Minister. So at the moment, we got the odds here. So we got Peter Dutton, the Dutmeister, $1.95. We got ScoMo, never have a FOMO, $2.45. Julie the Archbishop, $4.50. T-Rex, aka Mr. T Abbott, $26. Matthias the Terminator Corman, $51. Greg Goodwill Hunting Hunt, $61. And Crispy Pine at $71. We've obviously got Frydenberg at $81, but kind of past, I would say, Bishop, they're what we would call no-hopers.
Well, even, side note, as a little plug to our, a bit of nepotism going on here. Ross Cameron last night on the Outsiders actually predicted a combination of hasty Angus Taylor, Tony Abbott ticket, combination of two of the three, which he thinks will catch the Hail Mary 80-metre throw and score the touchdown, but that remains to be seen. Now,
well,
we actually have to talk a bit further away from the mic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we having some mic issues?
Yeah, just keep going.
Okay. Obviously, it's going to be tough to tell. What we have to understand as well, the reason why kind of Tony Abbott is not in the running, although he may be the one who would actually potentially win the next election out of all the possible candidates. One of the reasons why he's not there is because these moderates, this moderate kind of left-leaning faction within the Liberals really do hate his guts. They really don't like him. They would much rather see the house burn than Tony Abbott save it. So at the minute, we've got... So Turnbull had delayed the meeting until he was able to try and gather support for his two favourable kind of...
Which are... So what we see in the current climate is we would see ScoMo, Scott Morrison and Julie Bishop looking to kind of replace Malcolm as head of the moderates. And then you have Dutz being the leader of the Conservatives, and not really of the Conservative side of the Liberal Party, but not really a plan B for the Conservatives. They got Dutz, but there's this big cloud hanging over Dutz.
There is.
About this, is it 44C or something? Some section of the Constitution which basically says a sitting, I think it's a sitting member can't profit from government programs. Basically something along those lines. Anyway, Peter Dutton's wife runs two childcare centres, which Dutz obviously benefits from. And there was recently a policy change where instead of the government providing child care support directly to the parents, they provide it to the childcare centres. So Dutz could very well be in the firing line. And there are a range of, as we understand it, Liberals who are hesitant to overthrow Malcolm and support Dutton because they feel like if they support Dutton and Dutton is ineligible, or if Dutton takes over and has this massive cloud hanging over him as he governs, they feel like it'll look bad on them and it'll be even worse for the Liberal Party. Yeah. So even though there's a range of people who might actually prefer to see Dutton Prime Minister, they haven't yet committed to supporting him. So we're in Liberal Party purgatory, essentially, where no one knows where they want to go.
Kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. So the relevant section of the Constitution is Section 44. And pretty much that says that any person who has any direct or indirect pecuniary interest in any agreement with the Commonwealth is ineligible to be chosen or of sitting as a senator or MP. So not only kind of as a member of the cabinet, but more broadly as a senator or MP. But I think it's worth noting this is not new news either. This has been around for a while.
No, it is. It's new in that it was broken recently.
But
we wonder why it was broken exactly at the same time that Dutton challenged.
That's right. So my understanding is that both Labor and Liberal were aware of this for quite a while. Yeah, have been sitting on this for quite a while. But it is obviously it's awfully coincidental on that exactly at the time that Dutton challenges that this comes as an issue, and not only that, Malcolm did not really do anything to calm the storm surrounding the status of Dutton, but rather kind of prolonged the torture, so to speak.
What we see from Malcolm, a lot of people have regarded as kind of disgraceful or cowardly. insofar as Turnbull seems to be, doing the scorched earth policy on the Liberal Party, where every move he takes back, he burns the ground. So, and so, for example, Malcolm Turnbull has said, which might even be a consistent position. He said he doesn't think ex-prime ministers should still be in the parliament. Now, what that means is that he says if he is kicked out as leader, he will resign from the party. Now, the reason why that's important is because the Liberal Party has a one-seat majority in... Is it the House or the Senate? Can't remember. Anyway, so basically, if Turnbull resigns, the Liberal Party will be a minority government, and they'll need Bob Katter to get anything through, to get any legislation through. So that puts the Liberal Party in kind of an awful position where they won't really be able to get anything done until the next election. Not only that, he has really played up the Dutton eligibility thing, which a lot of people regard as minor. I'm not so sure it's minor, but...
I'm pretty sure it's minor. The advice from the Solicitor General so far has been that he's pretty much eligible. Obviously, it's not concrete yet, but this is, as I mentioned before, I'm fairly certain that this is something that's been kind of well known within the party, and had it been an issue before, with such a slim majority, it would have been brought up.
And more than that, to flip Turnbull, you need 43 people in the Liberal Party to agree to flip him. Now, Turnbull has asked to see those 43 signatures before he would call a meeting in which he might be flipped. Now, there's no precedent for the Prime Minister being able to see the signatures, and one of the reasons why people are hesitant to flip him is because Malcolm is quite factionally powerful. And so what that means basically is that he's in control of a lot of different moving pieces. So basically there are kind of teams where they say, well, if you help us, we'll help you. And if you don't help us, we'll try our best to smash you and get you voted out of your electorate, get you not pre-selected, and a range of kind of these things. And so people are feeling like, well, if Malcolm knows that they're flipping on him, then he's going to make their life hell. And Australia is one of the countries that has a secret ballot in that room. So if they were to flip Turnbull in the party room...
That's a party choice. That's a party choice.
Yeah. So usually that anonymity would be justified by people saying they can vote with their conscience. But right now it seems like there's a range of people who might like to vote against him, but because Turnbull is demanding to see those 43 signatures before he calls the meeting, they're scared of getting bullied. Now that's kind of cowardly if you feel like Turnbull should be flipped and you're worried about your position, but you can definitely understand it.
100%. I think, but if we also look back to when Abbott got flipped by Turnbull, that was by an anonymous ballot. That was not by a hands-up policy. Number two, the thing we should also remember is that one of the reasons why Malcolm is doing this is that it is a total bullying tactic. Obviously, you would hope that the MPs would have enough guts to put their name to their position anyway. But obviously, considering the nature of kind of power broking and the factional dynamic within the Liberal Party, the idea that putting your name on something could have negative repercussions is obviously a very real, a real concern. Look, in terms of, well, what do you reckon? Do you reckon who would be your pick?
Who do I reckon? I got absolutely no idea who's going to get it. I wouldn't bet my money on it at all. I think the thing that will be interesting is...
Well, sorry, just breaking. So we had previous news that it was a lot further away. Dutton now out at $2.15. We got ScoMo at $2.25. The gap between those two has closed considerably. It looks like there is a possibility that Malcolm has really leaned on a bunch of these guys within the party room in favour of essentially for ScoMo.
Yeah, well, it will be interesting if ScoMo takes over, because as far as I kind of read it, I feel like Malcolm is pretty much the best package you could get. I mean, he speaks well.
Cosmetically, I'd say in terms of cosmetics and the optics.
And so kind of putting just a new optics on the same policy which got him here would be a strange move by the Liberal Party, because it doesn't seem like there'd be a lot of policy change if Malcolm is, backing ScoMo or Bishop or whoever it is. So that seems kind of strange to me, but understandable.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, what you got to look at. One of the ways you can kind of tell is the two party preferred versus prime minister. Those numbers. What you have to remember is that Bill Shorten is unbelievably unpopular. He is extremely unpopular. Yet Labor does much better in the two party preferred. Not so much because Malcolm Turnbull is more likeable than Bill Shorten. It is only because Bill Shorten is so unlikable. That gap had recently closed, but had then blown out again.
You'd be pretty hard pressed to find a more uninspiring leader than Bill Shorten. And if you're kind of even competitive, if Bill Shorten's competitive with you, I think you're doing a pretty bad job.
It is remarkable, isn't it? Bill Shorten is a walking sloppy handshake. That's how I would describe him. He is a wet cloth bloke who couldn't punch his way out of a wet paper bag. The fact that we're even in this conversation is remarkable, considering he's essentially a union puppet. He used to work for the unions. Has presented no real...
Get stuck in.
Well, he's presented no real inspiring policy. But this is what kind of is driving the average kind of your regular Liberal voter up the wall, right? Is because of what's happened is the fact that Malcolm hasn't been able to really drive the screws in and nail this bloke based on policy has meant that what you've also seen happen is that you've had the Liberal Party itself splinter substantially, particularly on the edges.
Corey Bernardi's broken off
more defection towards One Nation.
Even the Shooters and Fishers.
They
picked up that seat in... Anyway, I can't remember the name. They picked up a seat in a pretty important by-election, I think, that the Liberals lost recently. Anyway, Alex can look that up. But, there's definitely like a lot more support for Pauline Hanson these days. One of the reasons is because she's not even like as people agreeing with her policies. It's more, I think much more of it is that people just like the fact that she's honest. And there's not a lot of honesty coming from the right-hand side of the Liberal Party, and it's obviously you can understand it because if they have their Prime Minister, they have to try and support him even if they don't agree with it. But so the only people on the right that are being honest is kind of like Pauline Hanson. Sometimes I don't even know if Shooters and Fishers you'd say are right. You get Corey Bernardi, but Corey Bernardi's not. He's not really a big player these days. He lost a lot of momentum. I don't know what really happened with him, but. I think there's a lot of honesty coming out of Pauline Hanson's side of the house, willing to call the government and Labor Party out, and I think there's just not a lot of options for people who are centre right, who look at the Liberal Party and just don't agree.
Yeah, and this is kind of happened on both sides of politics. We've seen it in the US with the Democrats. The people on the left, a lot of them are saying, look, I'm still on the left. I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me.
The goalpost
changed substantially. When the move towards divisive identity politics, race baiting, sensationalizing the immigration issue to the extent where ordinary American citizens feel left out, has left many kind of traditionally like slightly left voters in the US feeling disenfranchised with the system and the party. And we've kind of seen a similar thing, in my opinion, on the right in Australia. Fiscal conservatism, as well as social conservatism, has kind of been left on the back burner, and Malcolm has adopted kind of this Labor light policy where he's attempted to scalp the middle, but in doing so has totally alienated his entire base.
Yeah, sure. That's why one of the interesting recent developments in politics, after you see all this kind of splintering between kind of traditional sections of the political spectrum, whether it be left and right, is now shaping more into a nationalist versus globalist perspective, kind of an insider versus outsiders, or outsiders versus insiders.
Citizen versus bureaucrat, almost.
Citizen versus bureaucrat. And it's a new spectrum. And where the places where we see this most glaringly is obviously United States with Donald Trump, which we'll talk about in a second. You see it in Italy, where the populists just won the election, where it was the 5 Star Movement, and I forget the name of the party. Anyway, this kind of populist movement, which was literally started by a comedian, and then became intertwined with a kind of what people would describe as a far-right populist political party, has just taken over the government. You also see it in Brexit. You see it in France with Marine Le Pen. You see it in Germany with Angela Merkel's collapsing numbers. You see it in Poland.
Even in Canada.
You see it in Hungary with Viktor Orban. Yeah. You see it in Canada with reactions against Trudeau.
The Liberal Party.
And it's much more a kind of globalist versus nationalist battle than it is a left versus right battle nowadays. And the spectrum has changed so much. One of the interesting developments is if you're alive 30, 40, but probably 30 years ago, free speech was almost an exclusive issue on the left. You had Christian conservatives on the right who were the people saying we should ban rappers like NWA, we should ban The Simpsons, we should ban cartoons, and it was like kind of the left's big thing. We should ban criticism against like the Vietnam War or things like that. Now that issue has totally shifted to the right, where instead of banning things for being kind of inappropriate, against, offensive against Christianity, you get, they're offensive against Islam, or they're offensive against
gays and
range of people with whatever type of intersectional identity you might have. So that's an interesting change in the spectrum as well. But so as far as we can tell right now, it's much more a globalist versus nationalist political landscape. And the one we want to focus in on a little bit more today is the Donald Trump. So Alex, what I want to ask you is, what would you say to your average kind of Australian who kind of sees the media
and the perception of Donald Trump.
What would you say is kind of the biggest misconception of Donald Trump, or the thing that people should be hearing as a way to kind of analyze the Donald Trump thing that's not just kind of a hysterical surface level analysis?
Sure. The big one for me that always cracks me up a little bit is the idea the Donald Trump is racist. That's what gets me. And the first thing I always say is, well, can you give me a concrete example of where he's been blatantly racist? And the classic one I get is, come on, are you serious? Are you watching the same president? I'm like, just give me one. It's actually difficult to find an example of where he's been blatantly racist, because he hasn't been. And not only that, if he is a racist, he's an unbelievably ineffective racist. And the reason I'll say it is this, because his policies have helped the minorities more than any previous president ever.
Definitely more than Obama, who was black.
Obama was black. Yeah, that's right. He was black.
If anyone didn't know,
it's black. It's a black man. So I just want to hit you guys with a little bit of statistical information, because obviously it's all well and good for me to say minorities are doing better under Trump.
Trouble with that. Keep going.
That may have to be zucked. We might have to zuck that bit. So look, we've just had a report come out that says small business ownership among blacks are up 400% since Trump has been elected. In 2018, 45% of small business owners were minorities, up from just 15% in 2018. Okay. According to Rasmussen, support among black voters for Donald Trump has doubled since 2016.
And the support for Donald Trump's election in 2016 was actually still a massive increase from the support of Romney earlier on.
It doubled.
Mitt Romney got 1% black support. Donald Trump got 8% black support, and since then has doubled.
Well, he's more than doubled it. We're talking orders of magnitude now.
Mm-hmm. And one person I was talking to yesterday, just kind of a family friend who's not even particularly, doesn't really like Donald Trump, but he says when we talk about kind of the media and general reactions to Donald Trump, he said to me that BS walks. He said, if you're a black guy in America, you hear all this stuff about how bad it's going to be for you under Donald Trump, and then you kind of realize it's been 18 months. Nothing bad has really happened to me.
I got more money in my paycheck.
I got a job which I didn't. My brothers and my cousins, they started to get jobs as well.
Yeah.
Things might actually be looking up.
I get more money in my paycheck because of the tax cuts. I've actually got a job. If Donald Trump is, this is the thing. If Donald Trump is a racist, he is incredibly ineffective.
And one of the things that would actually be really helpful to black communities who don't really have jobs, who don't have a lot of prospects, you might not relate the two, but is actually Donald Trump's immigration policy. Because one of the things, it's not actually like there might be a deficiency of jobs, right? It's not like we actually need to create more jobs. It's like we actually need to just give the jobs to American people. We need to stop businesses being able to pay illegal immigrants hardly anything.
Yeah.
So then the American citizens actually, don't get the jobs because they have to pay, because these businesses would have to pay them more money and tax or whatever. It'd be much easier to pay an immigrant hardly anything, give him cash in hand. So if you're a black guy and you want to start moving up in the world, or a black girl, or whoever you might be, if you didn't have a good education from the government, or you grew up in a hard place and you see jobs that you could do, you could start developing skills, start getting training, start earning an income, but you just can't get access to it because there are several million other people who exclude you from the job market.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And look, obviously we're going to touch on the minimum wage later, but what I would say, just as a kind of a teaser, is that there is not a single more discriminatory policy against low-skilled minority workers than the minimum wage. There is no single policy that has done more damage to minority and poor communities than the minimum wage. And obviously we're going to touch on that and kind of flesh that out a little bit later. But I just want to leave that with you. And obviously kind of there is this massive conception that the minimum wage has to be raised to meet the cost of living. We'll flesh that out later. But just kind of bear that in mind, think it out in your head, and I tell you what, if you go up to someone and say the minimum wage is totally discriminatory against poor people, if you don't get your head kicked in, you'll definitely change their minds.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump's approval rating continues to rise, even though he's been plagued by, White House scandals,
leaking,
bad media, the Mueller investigation, the trials relating to that. But what do you think? Why do you think Donald Trump was an appealing candidate to many Americans? And why do you think it was surprising to the political class?
The first thing I would say, and I often have this conversation. First thing I would say is that what you have to remember is that it was a binary choice. It was a 2-horse race. You had a choice between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Now, a vote for Donald Trump is not necessarily an endorsement of Donald Trump. It can also be an indictment against Hillary Clinton. So at the same time as the election was coming up, you obviously had the email scandal with Hillary Clinton. You still had Benghazi, which was still floating over the top of Clinton. The target
money coming. You had campaign funds coming from Saudi Arabia for a supposedly feminist candidate.
Sure. You had issues with Uranium One, where 20% of US uranium had been sold to Russia under Secretary Clinton.
You had advocacy for a no-fly zone in Syria, which may well have seriously sparked tensions, if not some, proxy war with Russia in Syria.
You also had the alleged rigging of the Democratic primaries against Bernie Sanders.
Mm-hmm. You had Hillary being given debate questions by CNN, which kind of was a confirmation in a lot of people's eyes of the kind of media holding hands with the Democratic Party.
Sure.
Anyway, is that enough just after bashing Hillary, or?
Well, I don't know if it's so much bashing Hillary is a lot of those wounds are self-inflicted. Let's be honest.
You had the murder of Seth Rich.
That's what I was going to say.
Suicide.
Yeah. Well, we're in deep territory now, aren't we? Look, so you had all that stuff hanging over the head of the average voter. Now, What you also had at the same time was a bunch of kind of liberal elites.
Oh, one more you also had.
Yeah.
This is one that I found really interesting. Is when before Hillary was in Parliament, she was a lawyer. She successfully defended an accused child rapist. Well, one of the ways she defended him was she got the alleged child rapist, take a lie detector test. He passed the lie detector test. Then Hillary's taped on the phone, just as the trial's going on or just after it, laughing about how she doesn't trust any more lie detectors ever again. And so there was a lot of questions about her personality. People just thought she may have been an evil person.
Oh yeah, let's not also forget the treatment of her treatment of the people who came out and accused Bill Clinton of sexual misconduct. She pretty much destroyed them. She came out and
she's married to a
sexual predator.
Sexual predator, way worse than any
DJT.
Well, DJT said he, grabs them by,
Let's
fill
put
in the blanks. But he said
he
also said they let me do it.
Yeah,
right? Now, it seems like that might even be. That's not a defense of it.
No, obviously it's a pretty vulgar comment. But let's put it in context. What he was saying is that when you're kind of rich and tall and handsome, women come up to you and you can essentially grab them by the right. It's a vulgar comment. I don't condone it. I condemn it. I think it's awful and it's vulgar. But he was not saying that you go out and grab women by the... Okay? That's not what he was saying. Now, we've spent about 5 minutes listing Hillary's track record, which is not exactly stellar. So let's remember that all of this was hanging over...
Also, one more important thing was the Clinton Foundation.
Yep.
Where... both of these publics who'd been working, Bill and Hillary, who'd been working in public service for most of their lives, somehow have accumulated a net worth of 250 million. It also happened that whenever somebody made a donation to the Clinton Foundation, Hillary would use the State Department to help that person, whatever situation they were in. Well, for example, Julia Gillard gave 50.
That's what I was going to say. 50 mil or something.
50 mil or something to the
taxpayers' money
to the Clinton Foundation, who, by the way, raised several $1 million to rebuild houses in Tahiti. Apparently, they only built one house there.
Yeah.
Anyway, gave them 50 mil. Now Julia Gillard sits on the board of the Hillary Clinton Foundation or whatever, and gets heaps and heaps of money every year after her political career, and also all this status and stuff. It just seems totally paid for.
It's a racket. It's a total racket.
And that's the thing with the Uranium One scandals. I think there were some Russian companies that made some donations or Russian affiliated companies made some donations to the Clinton Foundation, and then somehow or another they end up with 20% of America's uranium, which Hillary orchestrated, while at the same time Hillary's out there bashing up Putin, saying we have to stop Putin at all costs. He's the worst person. Donald Trump's in bed with Putin. It's girl, you just let him make heaps more nuclear bombs.
Yeah. Let's get the priorities right. Donald Trump Jr. takes a meeting with a Russian official in Trump Tower after Hillary had sold 20% of US uranium to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's obviously that's done. That's the case against Hillary. It's pretty strong.
As you can tell, we're very objective.
We're super objective.
We hold no opinion. We just report facts. Actually.
We're just facts, no fake news. So you've got all this over the head of the average voter, coming into the election, and then Donald Trump, who is flies off the cuff. He's not polished. He's not a career politician. He doesn't really know how it works. He was the only one who said he wouldn't support he wouldn't necessarily support the Republican candidate who won.
Yeah, but this is one thing I wanted to pick you up on when you said it's definitely partially true that a vote for Trump may have been a vote against Hillary, but Donald Trump did also win the primaries against a range of kind of establishment Republican politicians.
Yeah.
Someone like Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush, who didn't have those kind of clouds hanging over.
Yeah.
So he was still able to beat those guys as well. So what do you think was appealing to Donald Trump as opposed to establishment Republicans then?
Donald Trump was, I think, really the first candidate in a couple of decades to really push the idea that we're going to bring the jobs back home, and we're going to put Americans first. We're sick of kind of looking after everyone else while the house is burning down. That was kind of the message, and I think that was really what resonated. Because obviously the stuff on the periphery, him financing his own campaign, him serious success in business, that was all kind of adds weight to the credential. But kind of the idea that for the first time in a while, after 8 years of Obama, and you had all these jobs leaving America, for him to come back and say, look, I'm going to put America first and I'm going to get the deal done. The kind of the crux of it, I think that's what really resonated with voters.
Sure. I think that's definitely true. Also, I think that people were fed up for a long time with both establishment parties.
Yeah.
They were fed up with Republicans under Bush and fed up with Obama. I think there's a range of compassionate individuals. A lot of people say Trump is like a racist. Trump supporters are racist. I think there's also a range of compassionate individuals who just weren't happy that there's a bunch of, refer to our last podcast, Middle Eastern civilians getting involved unnecessarily in wars that we didn't need to go into. And Donald Trump said we didn't need to be there.
Yeah.
I think Donald Trump also was the only one with a clear policy against ISIS, where he says our number one objective is to wipe out ISIS, and if Assad takes over, well then that's obviously better than a state where we're at now.
Yeah.
And so he said if Russia's happy to take care of that, we're happy to let Russia take care of that. We don't need American soldiers to go in and die to kind of make the situation even worse. We were supporting we were supporting a mismatch of rebels who weren't even fighting really together. A lot of the rebels actually hated each other. They just hated ISIS. They hated Assad. And the American foreign policy position was one that, well, we don't want ISIS to be there. We also don't want Assad to be there. So we're just going to create a situation where maybe
no one's there.
No one's there, but people are just continually fighting and dying, and civilians, have to evacuate or are killed in the mix. So that demonstrated, I think, a serious, and I think also people were just happy that we could maybe be friends with Russia instead of enemies. Kind of this idea that we always have to be enemies with Russia, I think is not as good as the idea that, well, if we can be friends, we should.
Sure. But I mean, Mitt Romney, I believe in 2008, when he was running up against Obama in a debate, made the comment, kind of, the interviewer said, well, what's the biggest threat to America at the moment? Mitt Romney said Russia was the biggest threat. Obama laughed at him. Obama said, you're an idiot, pretty much. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. Now, 8 years on, the number one story, the number one narrative pipeline coming out of the Democratic Party is that Russia is the worst thing and should be stopped at all costs. And even attempting to converse with them or to negotiate is abhorrent. Now, this is after Obama was caught on the secret mic saying to one of the foreign ministers from Russia, saying that, quote, after I get re-elected, I'm going to have more freedom, essentially. Which was essentially saying, I can do whatever I want with you and help you do whatever you need to do after I get re-elected. Right? That is an absolute scandal. That is scandalous.
Do you want to hear a quick conspiracy?
Yeah, shoot.
Apparently, this is, depending how deep you want to go with the conspiracy, Russia is very rich in natural gas, right? But there are several countries with trade restrictions and things against Russia. Anyway, Russia wants to build a natural gas pipeline from Russia that goes into Europe.
Yeah.
Now, my understanding is that that pipeline would actually go through Syria. And there's a range of economic stakeholders who do not want that pipeline to be built and supply cheap energy into Europe, one of them being America, who would be supplying some of that energy into Europe. So I've heard arguments that, like, kind of through the CIA and a few other things, they want to prevent that pipeline at all costs. Now it's conspiracy theory. I can't prove it, but
so they're backing a kind of a mixed match of hodgepodge bunch of rebels in order to destabilize the situation, in order to buy them some more time.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Now, anyway, we'll just leave that one out there.
I'm happy for this show to be the one that throws out conspiracy. Well, conspiracy theories are only conspiracy theories until they're proven true.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've done a bit of Donald Trump. I'm sure there'll be much more Donald Trump in the future, but maybe we'll even return to him on this podcast. But speaking of conspiracy theorists, breaking news over the last 1 or 2 weeks, Alex Jones and InfoWars got deplatformed by almost everybody. Now, credit to Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, who kept Jones's Twitter account active. And also, to an extent, Tim Cook of Apple, who, although they took down Jones... what did they take him down on?
Wow.
Apple did something.
Mate, breaking news. Scott Morrison voted next Prime Minister of Australia, defeating Peter Dutton 45-40.
Wow. Wowee. Wowee. We have one sad...
I'm not supposed to be emotional on this program. I'm supposed to be objective, but the idea of ScoMo as...
Julie Bishop deputy?
Let's have a look.
Probably.
If she challenges, surely she couldn't be the deputy.
Well, I mean, if they're both challenging with Malcolm's blessing, it'll probably be a Bishop deputy. I think she loves being the deputy. Okay. So we have a ScoMo Prime Ministership.
Josh Frydenberg becomes deputy.
Frydenberg deputy.
I cannot stand that.
So Frydenberg was the whole person who orchestrated the clean energy targets and the Paris Agreement.
Frydenberg is the architect behind Australia's energy policy, and Australia's got what, like the top 3 in terms of energy prices in the world.
Yeah, and before we used to have the cheapest energy. You know, so many countries. You look at Japan and China, right? So when I live in China, I can basically keep the air conditioning on the whole day when it's super hot, and I pay hardly anything. Right? One of the reasons why that can happen is because China buys Australian coal and then burns it and doesn't charge ridiculous prices on it. Now, Australia has, as you might guess, Australian coal, but chooses to whack massive prices on it, which means if you're an old pensioner, you can hardly afford to get out of bed and do stuff, or because it's just so cold.
You can't afford to turn the heater on. And so this is the thing. This is what happens during a recession, and what happens during price surges to do with anything to do with energy. People die. Like, this is, it's all fun and games to play politics.
Some winter deaths.
People die when this crap happens. Like, when these idiots are up there designing energy policy when they've got no flipping idea what they're doing. People die.
Well, this is one of the as a little side note. If I was the Prime Minister and I could make one change, I would probably say I would make all politicians paid the average Australian wage after tax. That's what actually I would do. But vote for me. But what I'm saying is that these politicians don't. They can. If you're an upper middle class person, you can afford to pay for the extra power. It's the people in places that can't afford to pay for it. They get hit.
Even then,
they don't know.
But
the politicians don't know what it's like to live in a cold house where you and your family can't really get to sleep because it's so damn cold.
It's pretty disgusting, and it is an egregious abuse of.
That's what I'm saying. Swap houses. Swap houses. If you're Josh Frydenberg, I want to see swap houses and swap incomes.
I want Josh Frydenberg to have his own little wind turbine at the front of his house, and that supplies all the electricity for his suburb. That's what I want to see, and I want to see how much how much of an advocate he becomes after spending 6 months relying on a wind turbine in Southwest Sydney.
God,
that's what I want to see.
Frydenberg's just come up with, he had a pretty trash first 2 cards, but the next 5 that just came out just all went his way. He got a full house at the end after Scott Morrison got the royal flush.
So you've got easily the least potent duo arguably in Australian political history between Frydenberg and Scott Morrison. I'm going to start a hashtag called the Soy Boys, specifically related to ScoMo and Frydenberg.
I just don't understand how they're going to be any improvement on Turnbull and Bishop. I can understand how Turnbull wants to keep these guys in, and the Liberal Party moderates want to keep these guys in, but I don't understand how all the people that were dissatisfied with Turnbull went and voted for ScoMo and Frydenberg.
It's the factions.
Anyway.
It's the factions. Anyways,
let's quickly finish on...
Heartbreaking.
Let's quickly finish on Alex Jones. So Jack Dorsey kept him up.
We also want to do minimum wage quickly.
Jack Dorsey kept him up. He's got his app, I believe, on the Apple Store still up. Anyway, banned from YouTube, Facebook, kind of, I think, everywhere
else. He was
else.
on porn sites as well. He actually had videos on porn sites, and they banned him as well. Who was seeing Alex Jones on allegedly on like Pornhub and YouPorn?
That's so funny.
And it's like the thumbnails, like Alex Jones, you know, like when he's like on a horse, like,
with
no
the shirt on,
on.
coming to save the
That
world.
super male vitality.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll quickly touch on Alex Jones. We'd love to extend it out. Our only problem is, you know, we're a bit constrained by our situations in a range of ways. We understand that the cleaner is coming in less than 15 minutes, so we've got a couple of topics to finish before they walk in the door.
Yeah. Let's pump through this.
Okay, Alex Jones got banned for hate speech.
Yep.
Not actually anything recent that he said, apparently. I think it's mostly about Sandy Hook, where Alex Jones did not believe that the Sandy Hook massacre, the school shooting, was a fake news.
Yeah.
Terrible thing to say.
Crisis actors.
Now, Jones, in his defense, has been proven right on several conspiracy theories. But you know, one of them being pedophilia in Washington. There's a range of, particularly out of the Democratic Party, if you look in kind of the last year or two, a range of particularly senior Democrats who've stepped out over pedophilia charges. Now, the media didn't cover this at all. Alex Jones was the only one that covered it. Alex Jones, you know, well, we can look up next time. We can talk about the things Alex Jones actually has got right. But he has a natural, I would say, healthy distrust of government.
I would agree.
Has a healthy distrust of
healthy skepticism,
CIA and FBI.
Yeah, I would agree.
He was talking about we should get out of, you know, Afghanistan and the Middle East for a long time.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he's been deplatformed. Bill Maher came out and defended him. We give props to Bill Maher for that, who said free speech, you know, free speech doesn't count if it's just free speech that you agree with. Free speech only counts if it's for free speech people you disagree
for everyone.
with. So we on this platform endorse that. We think everybody should speak. And if they speak trash, like, you should just be able to easily disprove it.
This is the basic idea that people keep talking about. Like, I mean, CNN, like Jim Acosta was asked, what do you think of InfoWars being banned? And Jim Acosta says, well, you know, we as journalists, we deal with facts and the truth, and if you're not friends with the truth, kind of, you know, you get what's coming to you. Now, this is Jim Acosta from CNN, fake news media, right? This is Jim Acosta, and he's saying that. And so, like, my thing is that, number one, we talked about it a little bit on the last podcast. There is always the risk that what you're saying is not true, okay? And kind of the arrogance to assume that everything that you think you know is true is true. Number one, it inhibits progress.
And progress in terms of problem solving. Because at its most basic level, free speech is a problem solving mechanism, right?
Absolutely. So what I would say is free speech is absolutely imperative, because even the people on the fringes, even the people who are considered extremists now, may not be considered extremists in 50 years, when in hindsight we look back and say, you know what, they actually got things right.
Okay, so let's talk about people who got in trouble for saying things that were true in their time period. Firstly, Socrates, stoned to death for corrupting the youth, but is basically the foremost, one of the foremost ancient Greek philosophers, Western philosophers, trained Plato, who consequently trained Aristotle, who trained Alexander the Great.
Yep.
He got killed for corrupting the youth. And if you look at anything he said, he's like the nicest guy. Everyone would love him today.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Galileo.
Persecuted by the church. Just the most classic example. We've still got a few flat earthers around today.
And Copernicus. We'll throw Copernicus in with Galileo.
In there as well.
Very offensive to the Catholic Church. Highly offensive.
Yep.
Offensive to the very core of their being.
Absolutely. But
Because
important side note. The church then had to reform itself. The church has had to reform itself a number of times. So you obviously had kind of the Galileo, and then you've had like Martin Luther, and kind of after kind of the witchcraft, as well as also post all the Crusades.
Yeah, I tell you what, the witches, they were highly offensive. The alleged witches,
they were super offensive, right? Super offensive. Turns out they weren't witches, right? But the church has reformed itself on a number of different occasions.
How about Charles Darwin?
Super
offensive, because it's the idea that God didn't snap his fingers and human beings were God. That would have been offensive. That would have been so offensive at the time.
That's not like you were challenging the very core of what people believed it meant to be human.
Yeah,
which is
that's at least a 10 out of 10 offensive rating from Charles Darwin.
That's a 9/9. That's a strong 9. And then what I will say though is,
and so the only thing I'll relate that to is if you're saying that criticism of Muhammad or drawing pictures of Muhammad, it's so bad. You see like the Charlie Hebdo shooting, you see the media coverage. Half the media is saying, oh God, it was bad that they all got shot, but they really knew what they were doing. Like they knew they were being offensive and provocative, like it's almost their fault. Or you see the Grand Mufti in Australia who called for it to be public criticism of Muhammad to be criminalised, right? Now, you wonder, geez, we might actually have some problems that free speech might help us to solve.
Yeah.
And almost always the solution to the problems that we face today is actually more conversation rather than less.
I agree. But one of the issues that we have kind of with Facebook, Twitter, censoring content is because basically Facebook and Twitter have to decide whether or not they are a platform for free speech or they are actually a content producing business, right? Because if they are actually in fact a content producing business, then they could be in fact sued for libel, right? So as soon as they start discriminating based on who should be on the platform because of the general image of it, they actually become a content producing site.
Now, to all those people who will say, well, Alex Jones, we kind of accept him, but in general, we're for free speech. We would also highlight Gavin McInnes, just been banned.
One of the funniest guys going around, Gavin McInnes. And you know what? I don't agree with him on everything. I think he's normally right. But he's hilarious. And we need more. We need more jokes. And he's
a comedian.
Yeah, but what I was going to say before when we talked about kind of the way that the left used to be kind of the big crusaders for free speech. What happens is the left used to be the ones who were funny, right? The left used to be the ones kind of poking fun at the big kind of almost archaic structure of society that was kind of pushed and propelled by these ultra conservatives who were super rigid and not able to kind of move or on their positions, right? And so that was what was funny. It was like poking fun at the establishment. The whole thing has flipped. The people on the right are now the funny ones. Like you look at these late night show hosts like Jimmy Kimmel, Stephen Colbert, Trevor Noah. They're not actually funny. People aren't actually finding them funny because they're just kind of the orthodoxy.
It's like Donald Trump is dumb, cue laughter. And it's the same joke on repeat.
It's the same gag every time. And so this is what's happening. The people on the right are actually the ones who are doing the memes and are the ones making actually funny jokes. And this is how you can normally tell who's in power in the sense in controlling the dialogue, because people that are controlling the dialogue can't be funny. They can't be, because there's an inherent friction between people wanting to find kind of a chink in the armor, which is kind of like a funny take on reality, which is why kind of the Jews are always so funny, because it's basically about real life.
Yeah. Well, one thing we can say on that, Kim Jong-un banned sarcastic comments in his government because he realised all these people were making fun of him.
Rocket Man.
Also, I wish I could remember, I think it might have been in Czech Republic, in the 1980s, I think, when they were still in the Soviet bloc, and it might have been Czechoslovakia. Anyway, there was one famous book written. This is just one of the times where I'm just going to say a few things and can't back them up, and hopefully, we can find them later on.
We'll get fact-checked later.
Anyway, they talked about when they're in the Soviet Union and they had this kind of super heavy government presence. They couldn't actually say anything. They couldn't say, well, this is wrong, this is what I think, blah, blah, blah. So they actually had that first language of obedience to kind of the established doctrines of the state. But they also had a second language of jokes, which couldn't be policed. They had a totally second language underneath, which only the people, I think it was in the Czech Republic, knew and understood and would engage in. And that was actually one of the most effective ways of criticising the government, but also one of the most feared ways, if from the government's perspective.
Well, one of the reasons why Milo was so effective, Milo Yiannopoulos, is because he's actually pretty funny. He's a funny guy. And same thing with Gavin. Gavin does not have a degree in economics or politics or political science or anything like that. He's pretty much a comedian, but he's able to point out the funny, like how rigid and how ridiculous things have become. And the truth is funnier than fiction. Kind of seeing the way that people are willing to almost turn everything and kind of grab a kind of a general thesis or whatever and reduce it to something that can be attacked in kind of this strawman fashion. It's gone way too far, but it's also funny. It's also funny. And that's what I say when people start banning comedians on campuses and stuff like that. Yeah. Jokes are just as important as any other type of speech, no matter how offensive.
I think there's a good chance stand-up comedy could even be the highest form of like public speaking.
I think you're probably right. I would back you on that.
And I want to do some stand-up comedy in China. I think that'd be funny. But anyway, why don't you give us the...
in Chinese?
No, in English. Why don't you give us the rundown on minimum wage?
Okay, cool. So just the kind of the elevated pitch, so to speak. Basically, the idea behind the minimum wage was originally to give kind of a base income for anyone who's working to prevent kind of the exploitation of the employer.
It was like giving the poor people... It's supposed to be giving the poor people more power against evil kind of
monopolistic, tyrannical employers. Okay, now the problem is when you have a minimum wage, let's just say it's $15 an hour. If you're saying to the employer, you got to pay me $15 an hour, for the employer to actually hire you in the first place, you have to be worth more than $15 an hour. You can be $15.10, but if you cannot produce $15.10, then they're not going to hire you. It doesn't make economical sense, right? So the issue is whether or not the government has a right to interject in the relationship between a potential employee and an employer on the basis that... Yeah,
that's half the issue, I think. Half the issue is whether the government has a right to intervene. The second half is the practical aspect.
Sure.
So there's one theoretical, one practical.
Yeah, well, like in terms of what?
Well, if the government, violates consent, right? And that's one part. But that's not really, you can't see that, it's not tangible. It's hard to see. Where you actually see it happening is when you're a guy, let's say you're a black inner city kid, who went to a crappy government school, dropped out when when you're really young. You're actually not educated to create $15 worth of stuff.
No, sure.
And if the minimum wage is $15, you have to understand that you'll never, ever, ever, ever get a job.
Yep.
Your family, your kids will just be on, and it's like this terrible poverty trap when kids just stay on welfare the cyclical whole time. Now, what else did you want to develop on that?
All I was going to say is that so people want to talk about immigrants' rights and stuff like that, and kind of the way that employers discriminate against people of colour, against people of ethnic backgrounds, different genders, whatever. The baseline is, if you're not worth what I'm paying you, I'm not going to pay you for it. That's a fact, number one. And you can always see that. And the people who aren't going to be worth initially the minimum wage are the people who are low skilled, poor grades, no qualifications. Okay, 3. So those are the people, almost always are the people who come from minority backgrounds, who are recent immigrants or kind of socio-economic.
And that doesn't even talk about automation. Like if you're a
Yeah.
like let's talk about low skilled jobs you can get. Let's say work at McDonald's. Let's say the government puts a $15 an hour minimum wage. McDonald's says, well, it doesn't make sense for us to employ people at minimum wage anymore. We're going to replace everybody. We're going to have maybe 2 chefs out the back. Everything else is going to be done on iPads because that makes more economic sense. Now, who loses out? Well, it's not the educated middle class. It's the people who were almost, worth $15,
But just not quite.
Yeah.
And look...
And the people who were worth $15 might have been worth $15, but were now too expensive compared to iPads.
Sure. And so the minorities, the people from who are traditionally kind of first generation immigrants, who are traditionally kind of from the lower socioeconomic backgrounds, those are the people who pay the price the most. It is by far the most discriminatory policy against people of lower socioeconomic backgrounds, against immigrants, against people of different ethnicities. It is by far the most destructive and discriminatory policy that the government of almost all Western nations are practicing. And the next time you hear people saying, well, we should raise the minimum wage, that is another several hundred thousand ordinary Australians who are trying to get their first job, learn some skills, become qualified in something, who will never get a run.
Okay. The cleaners are overdue by 1 minute, and I'm not willing to, I think, get into another topic because I think we've done pretty well.
I think we've covered almost.
Last things to say, a bit of housekeeping. This podcast is brought to you by My Style Suits. Go and check out the My Style Suits Instagram, Facebook page, website. What's your Instagram tag, Alex? Where can people find you?
Me personally?
Yeah.
At AlexCameron15, but I don't know if we're going to be publicly...
You can find me if you just look up Dougal Cameron, Dougal.
Yeah, well,
Cameron.
we might as well.
Follow us.
We might as well. We're already on
Produce some good content.
Sorry about the beers. No beers today. I've got work this afternoon, so we were on the waters today, weren't we?
Yeah, we're on the waters. We're on the healthy diet.
I'm getting on the kefir.
He's on the kefir. Maybe we can talk about that in the next episode. Gut health.
Unbelievably important post antibiotics because you need to build your gut flora and fauna. Unbelievably important. I cannot stress it enough. This is just a quick one. People have this idea of kind of the Whig version of history, which is essentially the idea that humans have been always... 2018 is always invariably better than 2017. We're always adding onto knowledge. Nothing gets lost. Only things get added to. This is kind of the Whig version of history. Unfortunately, it's not the case. We often lose stuff in kind of the ancient sphere, which is actually unbelievably practical in terms of real modern day. Kefir's one of them. Look it up. 100%. Have a look. Try it.
Anything you want to leave the audience with? Any interesting... One just interesting thought I had, kind of strange, you can take it or leave it. People talk about it's the little things in life that matter. I just was thinking about it the other day and I thought, well, maybe it's not so much, it's the little things, but just so much like when we're in a capitalist environment, which, we love capitalism here, but it means we almost always put a higher value on things that are scarce. But sometimes I think you can win when you put the same amount of value on things that are not scarce. So maybe having a conversation with your brother will actually be just as valuable, make you just as happy as if someone was to give you the opportunity to go and drive out a Lamborghini for the day. Maybe that will make you equally as happy. Maybe it won't. But maybe think about what are the things you put value on, and whether scarcity is a valuable metric by which to judge.
Well, I'll just leave them with this. One of my heroes is a guy called Thomas Sowell, Sowell. If you ever want to see someone who bucks the trend, who is just data-driven, analytical, and pretty much is one of the biggest proponents of the removal of the minimum wage, it is this guy, and he backs it up. He's studied it. He's absolutely the man on this, and he's African-American. And he is one of my heroes. I mean, it'll be an absolute tragedy when he passes. He's in his 90s, I believe, or late 80s.
We can go to the funeral. We'll get everyone on this podcast. We'll fly them all out to the funeral.
There's no doubt in my mind I'll have a little bit of a breakdown when he goes. But I would say Thomas Sowell, he's on YouTube. Some of his best bits, he just wrecks people.
He did an interview recently with Dave Rubin. Anyway,
That wraps it, I think.
Also,
Do you want to give a shout out quickly?
I'm happy to give a shout out to Socrates, our man who got smashed by the Athenian population for corrupting the youth. I'll read the passage of the book next time in the history of philosophy. Anyway, basically what it says is he was a short guy and very ugly, but was able to win people over because he was very unassuming and he would just talk to people about anything. He would talk to them about politics, economy, history, philosophy, housekeeping, health, fitness, house decorations. And he would just talk with everybody. He'd talk with them in the marketplace, at the gym. He'd talk to the lenders. He'd talk to his family. He'd talk to politicians. He'd talk to whoever. And what ended up happening, because he talked to anyone about anything, he became like this. His mind just became
Totally in tune to the
so
human
sharp,
condition. Yeah.
and he became totally conditioned to reality. And that's kind of part of the inspiration for this podcast. Before I started the podcast, I wanted to call it Corrupting the Youth. But there's one other podcast out there that has like 2 episodes, which is called Corrupting the Youth. So any name suggestions, any advice, tips, any production tips,
Even a tweet, send us something awful.
we're pretty bad with computers. If you want us to talk about something, any questions, we're on it. But that's about it. We can make a little introduction video about what this podcast about and aim to achieve in the future. But we just thought it's better to get something on the ground.
Yeah.
Than be worrying about perfection.
I agree. Get something out there. Have a crack first. Suit first. Ask questions later. My Style Suits. Check them out. Cheap suit rentals. Unbelievably good quality. Sydney area.
Run by 2 of the best business geniuses.
Free delivery.
in the
1
world.
to 2 business days at your door. Talk about service. That's My Style Suits.
Beautiful. We'll see you later. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for being with us.